It was the diplomatic equivalent of a sucker punch, delivered not in a back-channel cable, but across the glistening stages of the World Economic Forum in Davos. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, a man whose entire career has been defined by sober establishment diplomacy, looked squarely into the camera and effectively told the President of the United States that his multi-billion-dollar missile defense project was not worth the price of admission. The price, of course, being the thinly veiled suggestion that Canada's sovereignty was a negotiable line item. The reaction from the White House was instantaneous and volcanic. Donald Trump, never one to let a slight pass unanswered, took to his Truth Social platform, not with a measured statement of diplomatic regret, but with the kind of scathing personal rebuke usually reserved for primary opponents and hostile media figures. He didn't just express disappointment, he framed the Canadian decision as a betrayal of the highest order, a slap in the face to American generosity and a perilous gamble with continental security. In his view, Canada had been offered a seat at the table of the most advanced defensive architecture in human history, and they had chosen to walk away. At the heart of the rupture lies the Golden Dome project, a proposed missile defense shield that President Trump has touted as the modern equivalent of the Star Wars program, a layered network of space-based sensors and ground-based interceptors designed to protect the North American continent from a burgeoning array of threats. With an estimated price tag hovering around $175 billion, it is an undertaking of staggering ambition and technical complexity, one the administration claims will be operational within 3 years. For Washington, this was not just an American project, but a hemispheric one. The offer on the table, as laid out by the president himself, was presented with his characteristic blend of bombast and zero-sum logic. Canada could either pay a staggering $61 billion for the privilege of joining the system, or it could get it for free by agreeing to become the 51st state. It was an ultimatum dressed up as a deal, and for the vast majority of Canadians, it was perceived not as a diplomatic overture, but as a profound insult to their national identity, a crude attempt to leverage their security anxieties into political surrender. Mark Carney's rejection was swift and unequivocal. His office issued a statement that was polite in form but granite in substance, declaring that Canada is a proud, independent country with absolutely no intention of relinquishing its sovereignty. Behind the scenes, officials in Ottawa were reportedly incandescent, viewing the proposal as a dangerous escalation of Trump's long-standing fixation on annexation, a fantasy he has repeatedly aired in public, from suggesting Canada become the 51st state to sharing edited maps that absorb its territory into the United States. To understand the depth of the fury, one must trace the arc of this relationship back to its breaking point. For decades, the defense partnership between the United States and Canada was considered the gold standard of international alliances, a bond forged on the battlefields of 2 world wars and institutionalized through the North American Aerospace Defense Command, known as NORAD. This binational command, established in 1957, represents the ultimate expression of trust, with American and Canadian generals sitting side by side in a Colorado bunker, monitoring the skies for incoming nuclear Armageddon. That trust has now been poisoned. Trump's repeated public musings about annexation, his imposition of crippling tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, and his administration's seeming endorsement of separatist sentiment in oil-rich Alberta have shattered the veneer of collegiality. When U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently suggested that Albertans are very independent people who want sovereignty, it was heard in Ottawa not as an offhand comment, but as a dog whistle, a deliberate attempt to sow discord within the Canadian Federation. Carney's address in Davos was the intellectual and political culmination of this fraying relationship. In a speech that drew global attention, he declared that the old American-led rules-based order is not coming back, and warned that middle powers like Canada must band together to resist being preyed upon by larger coercive nations. It was a direct repudiation of the Trumpian worldview, a call for diplomatic diversification that explicitly rejected the notion that Canada's destiny is forever hitched to the whims of its southern neighbour. The Canadian Prime Minister has backed up this rhetoric with action, embarking on the most significant reorientation of his country's foreign policy in generations. Just days before the Davos confrontation, Carney announced a new trade agreement with Beijing, signalling a willingness to deepen economic ties with China, even as Washington pushes for decoupling. This pivot was the match that lit the fuse of Trump's fury, prompting his stark warning that Beijing can eat them up within a year, a crude attempt to paint Canada's outreach as naive and self-destructive. Defense analysts are now grappling with the practical consequences of this political divorce. Canada has already announced a review of its $13 billion deal to purchase 88 F-35 stealth fighter jets from Lockheed Martin, a contract that was once seen as unshakable. Simultaneously, Ottawa is inking deals with Australia for new radar systems and signalling a desire to deepen procurement ties with European allies like the UK and France, a clear signal that the era of unquestioning American defense purchases may be over. For the Pentagon and military planners, this represents a logistical and strategic headache of the first order. NORAD is currently in the midst of a $40 billion modernization designed to counter advanced Russian and Chinese cruise missiles and hypersonic weapons. The system relies on a network of sensors that stretch across the Canadian Arctic. If Ottawa begins to view every new radar installation or infrastructure project through the lens of sovereignty protection rather than collective defense, critical gaps could emerge in the continent's early warning architecture. Experts like Christopher Hernandez-Roy of the Center for Strategic and International Studies argue that Trump's rhetoric has fundamentally altered the political landscape in Canada, making it nearly impossible for any leader to be seen as cooperating too closely with Washington. What might have been a straightforward negotiation over missile defense technology is now a toxic political liability. Even if joining the Golden Dome were in Canada's clear strategic interest, the price of appearing subservient to a president who mocks Canadian sovereignty is now too high for any politician to pay. This dynamic plays directly into the hands of those who warn against the weaponization of space and the escalation of arms races. Canadian disarmament advocates, including former Ambassador Douglas Roach, have long cautioned that the Golden Dome is a dangerous illusion, a trillion-dollar boondoggle that will provoke new offensive nuclear systems and offer nothing but a false sense of security. By walking away, they argue, Carney is not endangering Canadians, but preserving a legacy of arms control that previous governments, both liberal and conservative, wisely maintained. The geopolitical chessboard is shifting in real time. With the United States seemingly in retreat from its role as the guarantor of the liberal order, Carney is betting that Canada can find security in a coalition of the willing, a network of middle powers that includes European nations and like-minded democracies in the Indo-Pacific. This is a high-stakes wager, one that assumes these partners can offer economic and military reassurance that rivals the heft of the American umbrella. However, the shadow of Iran looms large over this realignment. As the United States engages in Operation Epic Fury against Tehran, Carney has found himself in a precarious position, offering tepid support for Washington's stated goal of preventing a nuclear Iran, while carefully distancing Canada from the military planning and execution. This balancing act has already drawn criticism from those who accuse him of abandoning international law, and it sets the stage for an even more fraught confrontation if the conflict escalates and Trump demands tangible military contributions from a reluctant ally. Critics like former Foreign Minister Lloyd Axworthy have pounced on Carney's apparent inconsistency, pointing out that it is impossible to endorse the objective of a military campaign while refusing to participate in its execution. They warn that Carney has laid a trap for himself. If the war grinds on and casualties mount, and if Canada's new economic partners in the Gulf insist on solidarity, the Prime Minister may find that his rhetorical flexibility has evaporated, leaving him with no good options and a president eager to exact revenge. For his part, Trump shows no signs of softening his approach. His decision to revoke Canada's invitation to the proposed Board of Peace, a high-profile international initiative, was a deliberate snub designed to humiliate Carney on the world stage. It was a reminder that in Trump's transactional view of foreign policy, loyalty is mandatory, and those who refuse to pay the requested price, whether in dollars or in sovereignty, will be cast out into the cold. The immediate consequences for continental defense are worrying. Military integration on a scale unseen since the Cold War is now being questioned by politicians in Ottawa who must answer to a public deeply offended by American bullying. Training exercises, intelligence sharing, and the seamless cooperation that defines NORAD are all now subject to a new and unpredictable political calculus, one where national pride often trumps strategic necessity. Looking ahead, analysts warn of a dangerous paradox. The very threats that the Golden Dome was designed to counter, namely hypersonic missiles from Russia and China that could streak over the North Pole, require a unified North American response. By allowing the political relationship to fracture, both nations are increasing their vulnerability. A single nuclear warhead detonated over Toronto or New York would not discriminate between a Canadian citizen and an American one, yet the mechanisms to prevent that nightmare are now strained to the breaking point. Carney's gambit is not without its internal contradictions. To assert Canadian sovereignty, he must prove that Canada can defend itself, a task that requires massive increases in defense spending, potentially up to 5% of GDP, according to Trump's demands. This leaves less revenue for the social programs that define Canadian identity, creating a domestic political headache that will only intensify as the bills come due. The pursuit of independence may ironically require a militarization that many Canadians find deeply uncomfortable. The global reaction to this rupture has been a mixture of alarm and opportunistic calculation. America's European allies watch with dismay as the bedrock of NATO's northern flank shows signs of cracking. Meanwhile, Beijing observes with interest, seeing in Canada's overtures a chance to split the Western alliance and gain a foothold in the Arctic, a region of growing strategic importance where it has long sought influence. In Alberta, the separatist movement, emboldened by US officials' comments, presents a clear and present danger to Canadian unity. The province, with its vast energy wealth and historical grievances against Ottawa, is the soft underbelly of Carney's sovereignty project. If Washington can successfully cultivate the narrative that Alberta would be better off as part of the American enterprise, the very fabric of the Canadian Federation could begin to unravel. There is a historical irony here that is not lost on seasoned diplomats. For decades, Canadian foreign policy was defined by quiet diplomacy, the art of managing the elephant next door without getting trampled. That era is over. In its place is a shouting match conducted on social media, where the nuances of alliance management are sacrificed for the dopamine hit of a viral post. The adults in the room, on both sides of the border, are struggling to be heard above the noise. The coming months will be critical. If Carney can successfully forge new defense partnerships with Europe and Australia, and if he can manage the Chinese relationship without being eaten up as Trump crudely predicted, he may prove that a middle power can indeed navigate a multipolar world. But if those partnerships fail to materialize, or if they come with strings attached that are just as onerous as those offered by Washington, his bold gamble will look less like a strategic masterstroke and more like a reckless tantrum. Ultimately, the collapse of the Golden Dome deal is a symptom of a deeper malady, the erosion of shared identity and common purpose. The border between the United States and Canada was once celebrated as the longest undefended frontier in the world, a symbol of peaceful coexistence. Today, that border is becoming an ideological battleground, a line in the sand where two visions of sovereignty, two styles of leadership, and two understandings of alliance are colliding with potentially catastrophic consequences. As the sun sets on the old order, the citizens of both nations are left to ponder a chilling question. If the United States and Canada cannot agree on a common defense against a common threat, who will protect them? The Golden Dome, for all its technical flaws and political toxicity, was at least an attempt to answer that question. With its rejection, the silence that follows is deafening, filled only by the echo of threats, the murmur of realignment, and the distant, terrifying possibility of a threat that respects no border and asks no permission before it strikes.